In the heart of a relentless city, beneath the blinding glare of fluorescent lights, a war of words is about to explode. Karoline Leavitt stands at the podium, her grip firm, her gaze unwavering. Before her, a firing squad of cameras and ruthless questions, ready to tear her apart. This was meant to be just another corporate update, but the air is thick with something else. Something dangerous, something unstoppable. The room was laid out with precision, every chair aligned, each notepad at a perfect angle on the sleek black tables that shone under the room's bright lights. The sprawling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. But the blinds were drawn today, casting long shadows that seemed to slice the tension even further. The press had come in droves, the scent of fresh coffee mingling oddly with the undercurrents of suspicion and curiosity. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, her presence unyielding, her suit a sharp contrast to the soft blue backdrop emblazoned with her company's logo. She cleared her throat, her voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. "Thank you for joining us today. I am here to address your questions and provide clarity on our recent announcement." She began, her gaze steady and commanding. From the back, a hand shot up, the movement almost aggressive. It was Lisa Marnell, known for her incisive and often provocative style. As she stood, her red blazer a stark splash against the drab grays and blacks of the room, a ripple of unease passed through the room. "Karoline, isn't it true that your company's innovative project has actually been causing significant environmental damage? How do you justify this to your stakeholders and to the public?" The other journalists shifted, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging uneasy glances. This wasn't just any question, it was an accusation, wrapped neatly in a veneer of professionalism. Before Karoline could respond, the PR team, a group of poised individuals, subtly moved closer, their expressions tight. One of them, a tall man with spectacles, whispered something into Karoline's ear. This scene, easily overlooked, wasn't missed by the keen eyes of the observers. The confrontation was not just about facts, it was about control, about maintaining composure under fire. Karoline nodded slightly, then addressed Lisa directly. "Our project goes through rigorous environmental checks, and we are committed to sustainability. Can you specify the sources or evidence of your claim?" Her tone was calm but firm, challenging yet diplomatic. This was no longer just an argument. It was about to escalate into a full-blown confrontation. Whispers filled the air, journalists typing furiously on their laptops, their fingers a blur of motion. Lisa, not backing down, retorted, "Multiple reports from locals and environmental groups have surfaced." "Are they all lying? There are photos, testimonials." "You know as well as I do," Karoline interjected, her voice rising slightly, "that each claim needs to be substantiated. We take these allegations seriously, but let's not turn this conference into a trial based on hearsay." Security subtly moved closer to the stage, their eyes scanning the room. This wasn't just another press conference. It was a battleground where every word could tip the scales. In the midst of this, a few journalists voiced their support for Lisa, calling out for more transparency, while others criticized her approach, muttering about the lack of professionalism. The air was thick, charged with a mix of eagerness and dread, waiting like an elastic band stretched just before it snapped. Karoline took a deep breath. Her next words would be crucial. Above all, she knew that a confrontation like this was gold for social media. Every word, every reaction was potentially viral content. This wasn't journalism anymore. This was performance art, and the whole world was their audience. The storm was just beginning. Inside the humid press room, every detail seemed amplified under the harsh lights. The monotonous hum of the air conditioning, the shuffle of papers, and the occasional cough breaking through the mutter of hushed conversations. Center stage, under a blinding spotlight, stood Karoline Leavitt, her composed features contradicted only by a slight twitch in her clenched jaw. The room was packed. Journalists from various media houses crammed into every available space, cameras poised and recorders at the ready. The air was indeed thick with anticipation. Karoline cleared her throat, her voice resonating firmly through the microphone. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm prepared to discuss our latest project, but more importantly, address any concerns you might have." A hand shot up in the sea of journalists, cutting sharply through the artificial atmosphere. It belonged to a well-known journalist, notorious for her confrontational style. As she stood, a ripple of unease passed through the room. She had a reputation that preceded her: aggressive, incisive, and unyieldingly audacious. "Ms. Leavitt," she began, her tone deceptively sweet, "many commend your company's initiative, but there are rising concerns about the environmental implications of your project. How do you justify potentially devastating impacts for mere economic gain?" Before Karoline could respond, murmurs erupted from their right. Some journalists nodded in agreement with the incisive query, while others seemed annoyed, knowing this confrontation was edging towards performance rather than genuine inquiry. Karoline responded diplomatically, measuring each word carefully. "We are fully committed to sustainable practices and are in constant consultation with environmental experts. However, we appreciate your concern and—" But the journalist wasn't done. Cutting Karoline off mid-sentence, she continued, "But isn't it true that several reports have been suppressed to expedite approvals? This isn't about concern, Ms. Leavitt. This is about transparency and ethics." Now the room felt like an elastic band stretched just before it snapped. Karoline's press team exchanged nervous glances, mouthing words and gesturing subtly to try and regain control of the narrative. The security team, sensing the shift in energy, edged closer to the front, their eyes scanning for any physical escalation. Karoline's face hardened, a slight color rising to her cheeks. Maintaining her composure was paramount, but the pointed accusations were piercing through her well-crafted armor. "We have withheld no reports. Everything is conducted in line with legal and ethical standards. I must insist that we do not propagate unfounded accusations." "It's a simple question, Ms. Leavitt," retorted the journalist, her voice raising slightly, matching the increasing tension in the room. "Are you hiding something? The public deserves to know." The press room felt on the verge of chaos. Other journalists began shouting their questions, hoping to capitalize on the fragility of the moment. "Ms. Leavitt, can you assure us there's no foul play? Will there be an independent audit?" Their voices overlapped, creating a cacophony of suspicion and accusation. Just as the storm seemed like it was just beginning, Karoline raised her hand, signaling for silence. She took a deep breath, her next words crucial in steering the narrative back to safer waters. "Transparency is a foundation of our work," Karoline started, her voice louder and more assertive, cutting through the noise like a knife. "I invite any of you, and any regulatory body, to scrutinally inspect our processes. We have nothing to hide." The journalist sat down slowly, her brow furrowed, unsatisfied but momentarily out of ammunition. Karoline's team quickly distributed press kits with detailed reports and FAQs to diffuse further tensions and redirect the discussion. Meanwhile, whispers filled the air, journalists typing frantically on their devices, their screens glowing like small beacons in the dimly lit room. Conversations swirled, some defending Karoline's firm stance, others skeptical of the smooth overture. The confrontation, while seemingly subdued, had sowed seeds of doubt and curiosity. Outside, the sky had turned a brooding gray, mirroring the charged atmosphere left in the aftermath of the press conference. Karoline knew this was far from over. It was merely the calm before the storm. As Karoline Leavitt approached the podium, her heels clicking authoritatively against the polished wood floor, the tension in the packed press room escalated palpably. She gave a reassuring nod to her press team, positioned strategically near the exits and among the seated journalists, preparing for whatever might unravel. The air was indeed thick with anticipation. This was, after all, her first major public appearance since the scandal had erupted. Karoline's voice was calm and resonant as she began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. I understand there are various questions and concerns, and I am here to address them as transparently as possible." Her gaze swept confidently across the room. From the third row, a sharp voice cut through the murmured whispers. "Ms. Leavitt, Jessica Tamer from the Daily Review. Isn't it true that your company knowingly bypassed environmental regulations to expedite project completion, compromising community health? How do you justify putting profits before people?" Heads turned as the provocative question sliced the previously decorous ambiance. Karoline maintained her composure, though her advisors subtly tensed. Before Karoline could answer, another voice, supportive yet concerned, chimed in. Could we please stick to constructive journalism? We're here for truthful answers, not sensationalism. This was no longer just an argument, it was teetering on the brink of an explosion. Karoline paused, weighing her words carefully. Ms. Tamer, we adhere strictly to all regulations, and any insinuations to the contrary are misinformed. However, I appreciate your concern and invite any factual evidence to the contrary to be reviewed thoroughly. Jessica smirked, unyielding. Evidence like the internal emails leaked last week indicating the contrary? Karoline's press aide quickly approached the podium, whispering urgently. Meanwhile, mutters and clicks of cameras filled the charged atmosphere. Some journalists nodded in agreement with Jessica, while others appeared visibly annoyed by her confrontational stance. Taking a deep breath, Karoline responded, "It is crucial in discussions like these to distinguish between facts and misinterpretation. Those emails were taken out of context, and actions have been consistent with all legal and ethical standards." The exchange became a pendulum swinging between heated accusations and poised denials. Security personnel discreetly moved closer to the front, their presence a silent warning against any physical outbursts. Amidst this back and forth, a seasoned reporter from the middle of the room stood up, asking everyone to remember the professionalism and respect foundational to such engagements. "This isn't journalism, this is performance art," muttered a journalist under her breath, loud enough for several nearby colleagues to hear and quietly chuckle. The storm was just beginning, thought Karoline, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Every answer, every reaction would ripple through the public sphere like a shockwave, amplified immeasurably by social media. As the questions continued, veering from financial dealings to personnel controversies, Karoline held her ground. Her team worked silently, passing notes, verifying facts, ensuring that her responses were not just defensive, but assertive and factual. The session lasted over an hour, leaving the room swirling with mixed sentiments. The security guards relaxed as journalists began packing up, but the echoes of the confrontation remained, reverberating through tweets, articles, and headline news. Karoline's final statement, sincere yet firm, aimed to mend some fences. "I am here today because I believe in transparency and accountability. Let us not allow this session to be diminished by theater. We are here to address real issues, and my commitment remains unshaken." As people slowly filtered out of the room, the tension that had built up seemed to dissipate, leaving in its wake a trail of speculation, analysis, and countless pending stories. The waiting had stretched like an elastic band, and as it finally snapped, the aftermath was a cascade of thoughts, opinions, and ultimately consequences for Karoline Leavitt. As the press conference at the heart of a grand, oak-paneled room at downtown's iconic City Hall continued, Karoline Leavitt, dressed in a sleek navy suit, faced the gathered reporters with a practiced calm. Yet under the surface, the tension was palpable, almost electric. The journalists occupied rows of foldable chairs. Most of them clutched notepads or digital devices, their expressions varying from keen interest to skeptical scrutiny. The air was indeed thick with anticipation as Karoline addressed the crowd, her voice steady but underlined with the strain of impending confrontation. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "I hope to clarify any doubts and foster a transparent dialogue with the press." From the back, a determined journalist, Lisa Morton, noted for her assertive questioning, raised her hand abruptly. Her voice cut through the murmurs of the room, sharp and unyielding. "Karoline, while your initiatives have been praised by some, there are allegations of misconduct and misuse of fund. A comment on that?" Karoline paused, her eyes locking with Lisa's for a brief, charged moment that felt like it stretched much longer than it actually did. Before Karoline could respond, murmurs broke out amongst the other journalists, some nodding in agreement with Lisa's bold confrontation, others frowning at her direct approach. The air felt like an elastic band stretched just before it snapped. "Thank you, Lisa, for your question," Karoline answered professionally. "I assure you and everyone here that my team and I uphold the strictest standards of integrity. However, I believe in accountability and am open to any audits or investigations deemed necessary." Just as Karoline thought she could move on, Lisa fired back. "But isn't it true that your close associate was found guilty of embezzling funds last Tuesday?" Gasps rippled through the audience. The storm was just beginning. The security guards subtly moved closer to the stage, their eyes scanning the crowd for any further disturbances. Press service staff exchanged nervous glances, preparing to intervene if the situation escalated any further. Unexpectedly, as Lisa prepared another question, a faint yet distinct sound echoed through the chamber. A beep repeated at intervals, growing louder. The room fell silent, and Lisa paused, her mouth half open. Karoline froze, and the press service staff hurriedly checked their devices. The security team tightened their circle, a protocol for potential threats. "It seems," Karoline finally broke the silence, her voice tinged with forced calm, "that we have an unexpected fire alarm. Please, we need to evacuate the building now, calmly and orderly. We will reschedule the remainder of this press conference at a later time." The confrontation dissipated as quickly as it had flared up. Journalists, security, and staff alike moved toward the exits. Lisa was momentarily sidetracked by the urgency of the situation, her provocative questioning forgotten in the scramble. As they filed out, the ripple of unease was now overtaken by a wave of confusion and slight relief. Outside, under the open sky, Karoline took a moment to breathe. The press service team gathered around her, murmuring about checking the source of the alarm and ensuring it wasn't a false signal aimed at disrupting the conference. Karoline looked back at the city hall, its grandeur slightly less intimidating under the afternoon sun. "This wasn't journalism today," she remarked quietly to her closest aide. "This was performance art, and it's far from over. We'll need a new strategy moving forward." As journalists huddled in groups, discussing the sudden twist and speculating on its timing and intent, social media buzzed alive with posts and tweets. A confrontation like this, after all, was gold for the digital age narrative, each person eager to dissect and present their angle on the day's dramatic turn. As the press conference room buzzed with the cacophony of reporters setting up, Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium. Her composure was solid, like a lighthouse in a brewing storm. The room, vast and usually neutral in tone, felt suffocatingly tense today. Spotlights cut sharp beams across the semi-darkness, highlighting clusters of journalists, some scribbling notes, others whispering predictions. The metaphorical air was indeed thick with anticipation. Most eyes were glued to Karoline, sensing the impending drama. Her press team flanked her, whispering last-minute advice and checking their devices frenetically. A hush fell suddenly as the press secretary gave the signal to begin. Karoline cleared her throat, opened her mouth to speak, but was abruptly interrupted. A voice cut through the room, not just audibly, but almost tangibly, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "Why is your organization hiding the real numbers from the public?" the opposing journalist demanded, her tone accusatory and her eyes fiercely locked on Karoline. This wasn't a question. It was an arrow aimed straight for the heart of the conference. A ripple of unease passed through the room, and the other journalists perked up, smelling blood. The rhetorical elastic band in the room stretched tighter. Karoline paused, her eyes briefly flashing irritation before regaining her calm. "Thank you for your question," she began diplomatically. "However, I assure you, we are committed to transparency. Can you specify what numbers you're referring to?" But the journalist was relentless. "The incident last month. The reports were drastically underreported. What are you trying to cover up?" Some reporters murmured in agreement, emboldened by the confrontation. Others looked uncomfortable, disapproving of the aggressive tactic. Karoline's press team shuffled nervously, exchanging worried glances. Still maintaining her poise, Karoline responded, "I can assure you there is no cover-up. We can go over the specific data you're interested in after this conference." But it wasn't enough. The journalist stood up, her silhouette framed dramatically by the bright light aimed at Karoline, turning her almost into a shadowy antagonist in a stage play. "The public deserves to know now, in this room. We're tired of post-conference clarifications that lead nowhere." The air seemed to crackle. Karoline's staff members whispered urgently amongst themselves, some proposing to move on, others suggesting they address the question head-on. Just as Karoline opened her mouth to respond, the room's tension climbed to its peak. It was no longer just an argument. It was about to escalate into a full-blown crisis. This was gold for social media. Phones lifted in unison, recording what would certainly become viral footage. This isn't journalism. This is performance art. Karoline finally stated, her voice cold and steady. If there's a legitimate concern, it should be addressed properly, not theatrically. The confrontational journalist smirked, unrelenting. Then let's give them a show they won't forget. Why not here, right now? Transparency starts in the light, doesn't it? As security subtly moved closer, sensing the possible need to intervene, a tentative peace was brokered by one of Karoline's senior press aides. We will provide a detailed report to all attendees immediately after this conference, he announced, his voice a calm, mediating force. The journalist sat down, her point made, her presence felt. The rest of the conference proceeded under a shadow, each question tinted with the residue of the earlier clash. As the journalists filed out, the whispers didn't discuss the content of the conference, but the clash. Karoline stood by the podium a moment longer, her mind racing with the implications of what had just unfolded. The storm was just beginning, and she knew well that the real challenges lay ahead, beyond the temporary shelter of staged words and managed appearances. As the tension in the room crescendoed, Karoline Leavitt stood firmly at the podium, her eyes scanning the sea of journalists whose attention was now riveted on the unfolding drama. The air, heavy with the expectation of her response, seemed to hang on her every word. The leading confrontational journalist, her brow furrowed with a mix of defiance and anticipation, awaited Karoline's retort. Karoline cleared her throat, her voice steady, yet imbued with a calm authority that seemed to momentarily still the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her eyes locking with those of the provocative journalist, I understand that the essence of journalism is to question, to challenge, but let us not conflate provocation with insight. The room shifted, a palpable change, as if her words were a balm to the previously agitated atmosphere. Some of the journalists nodded in agreement, while others seemed to reassess their stance, their expressions morphing from anticipation to reflection. The journalist who had sparked the confrontation leaned forward, her pen poised, ready to scribble a retaliatory question. But instead she paused, perhaps reconsidering her approach under the collective gaze of her peers. Karoline continued, This forum is a platform for seeking the truth, and it serves us all to engage respectfully and constructively. From the side, a press service aide handed Karoline a note. She glanced at it briefly, her expression unchanging, then addressed the room again. Let us redirect our focus to the issues at hand, the actual matters that impact our community and beyond. That is what will serve our public, not the spectacle. Murmurs of approval echoed subtly through the crowd. It was clear that Karoline had not only diffused the bomb, but turned the situation around to reinforce the integrity of the discourse expected at such gatherings. The provocative journalist finally broke her silence, her tone less confrontational this time. Thank you for your perspective, Miss Leavitt. How then do you propose we address the discrepancies noted in the report? Karoline nodded respectfully. A valid question, and that's exactly the type of inquiry that moves us forward. She proceeded to detail the steps her team was taking to address the reported issues, providing clear, concise information that commanded attention and respect. As the press conference drew to a close, the atmosphere had transformed from one of looming conflict to one of collaborative pursuit of truth. Security personnel, initially tense and alert for any escalations, now stood relaxed but vigilant at the room's perimeters. Journalists gathered their notes and cameras, many faces reflecting a newfound respect for Karoline's tact and grace under pressure. The buzz was no longer about the conflict, but about the adept handling and redirection of a potentially volatile situation. Outside, as journalists dispersed, the leading journalist exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod with Karoline. It wasn't a truce, but an acknowledgement of mutual respect in a battlefield often dominated by egos. Karoline, back in the quiet of her office, reflected on the day. The storm had indeed begun, but in its wake, it left a clearer sky, a metaphor for her clarified stance amidst the tumult. This confrontation, while unintended, served as a poignant reminder of the delicate dance between public figures and the press, the perpetual stretch and pull, akin to an elastic band that today had not snapped, but had flexed its resilience. She realized that amidst the chaos, there was an opportunity to lead with poise, ensuring the storm led not to wreckage, but to rejuvenated understanding and respect. This wasn't just journalism or performance art. It was the art of diplomacy, playing out on the public stage, a ballet of words and wills, where ultimately integrity was the standing ovation.